Evening. Welcome to the November edition of the Digging Deep podcast. We're very excited to get to be with you tonight to talk about the trials of a great, courageous man named Joshua and what we can learn from those. I have with me Holly Smith.
Hi.
So
Hi.
glad that you are with us tonight.
Thank you.
Holly doesn't need an introduction. We've actually had several people visit our services who look at Holly and say, "Hey, I know you because I've seen you on Digging Deep." And so we're glad to have you back
Thank
again.
you.
It's a really busy time of the year, and I am grateful for the time that you've taken both to study, to lead our Northwest Alabama study last night, which was a great prep time for me to get ready for this, and to be with us tonight. Just thank you so much. Have a good holiday.
Yes, we did. We did.
Were
We
you
went
out
out
of
of town.
town? I thought you were.
We went to my husband's parents' house.
Okay, so that was fun. Well, we went to my dad's, and we are now gearing up. You know, we have a wedding this month, so we're gearing up for that, and Christmas party at
Yes,
our
we did.
house
We
with
did.
the
We went out of town.
congregation. So we are
My
busy,
husband's
and I know you are too. It's a great time of year. Next month podcast, well, it's this month already. December's podcast will actually be the first Tuesday night in January. I think that's January 5th. So if you want to mark your calendars, go ahead and mark them for January 5th, and we will convene at that time. We'll be all stuffed and heavier and maybe not, and tired, but I trust that you will get your study done in December. Pace yourself so that you can have time to get it all done, and we will begin the podcast at 7 o'clock on January 5th for the month of December. So again, welcome. Holly's going to begin our prepare us really for our study tonight by starting us off with a word of prayer.
Okay, let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for another day that you've given us, and we thank you for being able to get together tonight and study your word and discuss your word with ladies all over the world, and we just thank you so much for that opportunity. Thank you so much for all of the ladies that are involved in the study, and we just pray that we all glean from your word each and every day as we are digging deep into your word. Thank you so much for your Son who came and died so that we can have the hope of heaven, Lord, and we just pray that you will be with us to live a life that we will be able to spend eternity with you and take as many people as we can with us, Lord, and we just thank you so, so much for your love and your mercy. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. You know, as I thought about Joshua actually driving over tonight, I was listening to Sister Jane Washington. She was teaching at Polishing the Pulpit. And as I listened to her, she was talking about running the race and how that we have to be finishers. We have to plan and pace ourselves so that we can, through the good times and the bad, finish the race. And Joshua did that.
Yeah, he did.
When I think about him going through, coming out of Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, and preparing then, he was there when the people went after the golden calf, and then he was there as they prepared to go into the land of Canaan. He was chosen as one of the spies who went in, and then he received the verbal persecution of his own people as he tried to faithfully follow and courageously stand for what he knew God wanted him to do, as he had already promised him that the land was theirs. And in fact, they got so angry that they wanted to stone him. He went through all of that and then to the finish line once, and he was obviously terribly disappointed because the people's lack of faith prevented them from going into the land of Canaan. And 40 years. Holly, I don't even think you're 40 years old. And, when you think about 40 years that he had to struggle through those wilderness wanderings and how the people behaved during those wanderings, and then once again come to the finish line, to the promised land, and go in and conquer. It wasn't that he finally got to the finish line and got to take a break. He had
Right.
to go in there and subdue kingdoms. And as I think about that perseverance, as he was long suffering with those people, he amazes me. He really amazes me. And I think about Hebrews 11, and his name is not there, but when we look at verses 28, 29, and 30, talking about Moses in 28, it says, through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. Well, so did Joshua.
Right.
By faith they passed through the Red Sea. Now we're by faith they, and that is Joshua and his crowd. They passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which when the Egyptians tried to do it, they were drowned. And then it says in verse 30, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were compassed about 7 days. And the harlot Rahab perished not with them that believed not when she received the spies with peace. We're there. The story of Joshua is there in Hebrews chapter 11. It was his faith as the leader of the people that was primary in the destruction of Jericho and in the salvation of Rahab. That was her faith, but of course he was the one instructing them to save Rahab. So Joshua is definitely in the Hall of Faith. And then if we finish out that chapter, he's further on down to, it says they wondered, it says, of whom the world was not worthy in verse 38. They wandered in deserts and in mountains. So these all, verse 39, having obtained a good report through faith, did not receive the promise. Oh, but you say, but Joshua did receive the promise. We're talking about the promise of salvation. That's what the book of Joshua is, and the Numbers accounts that we're going to be studying about tonight. It was that God had picked out this nation of Israel, and through this nation he was going to bring about the Messiah.
Right.
They were the school bus to take us to school. And, they were the shadow of the reality that was Jesus Christ on the cross. And so they didn't receive that promise. They were just the vehicle, the nation through which that promise was going to happen. And it was so hard for God to use that faithless people to bring about the Messiah. And yet he did. God having provided some better thing for us, and we're in the better part now, we have
Right.
Christ, that they without us should not be made complete or whole. And then chapter 12, verse 1, so, wherefore, seeing we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses. What does your version say there in that first line, Holly?
Same thing.
Okay, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily besets us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Man, that's Joshua. It says there, since we're surrounded by all these people in Hebrews 11 of the Old Testament who had this faith like Joshua, then let's be encouraged by them. Let's look at their examples and let's learn perseverance and finish this race, because we get to look to Jesus, the author, the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of God. He's finished. He finished. He didn't stop in the middle. He has finished writing our story. If only we will have the faith that Joshua had to finish, to be finishers even in spite of persecution. So that's my little intro for Joshua. And so first, we're going to go to Numbers chapters 7 through 15. And the assignment was from chapter 7 to list all the things that were offered to God in the raising of the tabernacle. Well, it's interesting, isn't it, how that chapter listed them
Over and over.
Over the same thing over and
Mm-hmm.
over. And at first, I wrote them down for the first
Me
for
too.
the first person, and then I thought, wait, I'm writing the same thing down over and over. And so, from each of those 11 tribes,
Mm-hmm.
every time, um, well, it was all of this times 12 actually, because we have Joseph, we don't have Levi in there, but we have Joseph in there, and he was 2 tribes.
Right.
So we have all of this times 12. And so just really quickly, spout that list off.
Okay. All right. Every day was 1 silver plate, 1 silver basin, flour, oil, 1 golden dish, incense, 1 bull, 1 ram, 1-year-old lamb, 1 goat, 2 oxen, 5 rams, 5 goats, and 5 lambs.
Okay, so that's times 12.
Mm-hmm.
And so verses 84 to 88 give us the entire list. So go ahead and tell us what that
12
is.
silver plates, 12 silver basins, 12 gold dishes filled with incense, and 12 rams, 12 bulls, 12 male lambs, grain, 12 male goats, 24 bulls, 60 rams, 60 male goats, and 60 male lambs.
Okay, this was nothing like the list that was dedicated to God at the time of the dedication of the temple of
Right.
Solomon. Really, in our, I looked this up, and in our dollars today, it was probably about $660 worth of things there that were given. But we learn, and I picked out 3 S words just to help us remember. We learned from this that God always demands our attention to his specificity. This was really specific. This was not just ordinary flour.
Right.
I mean, he described. He
Right.
wanted the best of the flour. He wanted in the burnt offerings the bullock, the ram, and the lamb, but then a kid for the sin offering. 5 goats, and he said he wanted he-goats, and 5 first-year lambs. So what do you think would have happened if they weren't following the specifics here that God wanted them to?
They would have been in trouble.
Yeah. This was not going to be acceptable to God
Right.
if they didn't follow the specificity. So God was specific here. And then secondly, this wasn't just about making a sacrifice. This was about their sanctification. This was about their holiness. This was a religious, spiritual activity. I was reading from one of the commentators, I believe it was Clark, and he was saying that it looks like some of this sacrificing was made on the Sabbath day when you read this. I'm over in Hebrews still, but when you read this, it talks about the 7th day as if some of this occurred on the Sabbath. And he wasn't so sure that it did, but he said even if it did, these were religious observances. This wasn't just work or sacrifice. This was all about sanctification. So it was about specificity, it was about sanctification, and it was about sacrifice. I was studying with someone on Sunday during our Bible class hour here, and her question was, since you, Cindy, believe that we are not under the old law anymore, then what good is it? It's just like you're just saying we might as well throw it out. No. No. Because how could we understand Christ's priesthood if we didn't know about this priesthood?
There's so many things.
Go ahead and name some of them.
Well, when the temple, when Christ dies on the cross, the curtain is stripped in 2. And you really wouldn't understand that unless you had read about
You wouldn't
that.
know anything about going into the
there's
Holy
so
of
many
Holies,
things,
the
yeah.
access that we have to the
Right.
throne of God, the sacrifices. How could we even know what the cross of Jesus meant,
Right.
the significance of that, if we didn't know about the sacrifices?
Right.
How could we know about the church if we didn't know about the temple?
Right.
How could we know about the whole book of Galatians or the whole book of Hebrews? We would not understand if we didn't
Right.
know about Judaism. So
Right. There's so many things.
when we look at these 3 S's,
Right.
specifics, sanctification, and sacrifice. They're all expected of us.
Right.
And we can understand, we can know what sanctification means when we see the process that they went through here of sacrifice and of cleaning. We can understand that God expects a great deal of us as far as following his specific will, setting ourselves apart from other nations, and in our case it would be the sinfulness of the world around us, and being sacrificial in our living to him. Do you have any more comments about, or are there any comments about number
Not
one?
on here, no, there aren't. But the specificness, I don't know if that's a word, but the just being so specific. I mean, there's so many times in the Old Testament that God was very specific, and they changed it just a little bit, you know.
Yeah,
and
Uzzah, you
right,
think
Uzzah
about.
is one. And you know, I mean, there's just so many
Nadab and
times
Abihu.
Nadab and Abihu, and if we didn't understand that, I mean, there's so many examples of those instances. We wouldn't understand why God wants us to be so specific now with the new law as well.
Exactly. We have all of those. Wherefore we are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, and we can learn so much from them. All right, from chapters 9 and 10, it says, highlight the verses that chronicled proof that God was with Israel. We're going to just go quickly through these, and I know we went through these last night, so go ahead and tell me your list of verses. And do you have any, like I have 9:1 as first, God
Right.
spoke to Moses.
Yes, that's
So
what I
we
have.
know he was with them because he was speaking through Moses. What do you have next?
I have verse 15 and 16, just the presence of the cloud and the fire. We talked about last night how 16 says, always. What is that? Let me
Yeah.
read that real quick.
It was always there.
16 said, so it was always.
And we also talked about how that was a visual.
Right.
That was a visual, something they could look at every day and know
And know that God was
that
there.
God was with them. And, you know, when we start to approach the lack of faith that they're about to have, every day they were looking at a pillar of fire and a
Right.
cloud that was obviously God's presence with
Right.
them, and yet they doubted that they could deal with these other nations. You know, it's incredible. What else?
I have 17 through 23, just the presence of the cloud again. He
Okay.
talks about that.
Okay.
And then in chapter 10, do you have any more in 9?
No.
Okay, chapter 10, I have verses 1 through 8, the Lord spoke again to Moses. And then we talked about how that in verse 9:1 also is it's auditory. It was an auditory sign.
Well, and in 10, 1 to 8, he designed this alarm system.
Right.
You know,
right.
so that they were hearing the communion that they were having with the Lord. So, okay, and then do you
I have 9 and 10, the trumpet call,
okay.
and
And in 9, God promised to hear and remember.
right, that
Okay.
they would save him from their
Okay.
enemies. And then I have a verse 11 and 12 that they followed the cloud. Verse 29 that God's promise to do good to Israel.
Okay.
And verse 33 that the ark searched out a resting place. And verse 34 that the cloud was over them again.
And when we think about the resting place, come unto me, all you that labor, and I will give you rest. God's always promised his people rest,
Right.
refuge, rest. And that doesn't mean that life's always going to be easy, but we can rest in knowing that he is going to keep his promises. He
Right.
is going to take care of us. So I love the rest there. And then from chapter 11, it says, highlight the question that the Lord hated. And realizing that this was a little bit ambiguous, I did write a blog piece about this, so I hope that you all have seen it. There was a question that was asked in chapter 11 that begins with the word why. And what was that question?
In verse 20, it's why did we come out of Egypt?
Yeah, why have we even come out of Egypt? Even a whole month, well, God just, verse 18, say to the people, sanctify yourselves against tomorrow, and you shall eat flesh, for you have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, who's going to give us any food to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. And God says, okay, I'm going to give you food. You're not going to eat it one day. nor 2 days, nor 5 days, or 10 days, or 20 days. But you're going to eat it a whole month till it comes out your nostrils, and you hate it, because you've despised the Lord who's among you and have wept before him, saying," and here's the question, "Why did we even come up out of Egypt?" Holly, just share with us what that makes you think.
Well, I feel like that's just a slap in the face of God, because here they were in Egypt for over 400 years, not in good situation. And we talked about last night how in the first part of chapter 11, they were talking about all the good food that they ate in Egypt. And, food is important, yes it is. But, I mean, just think of besides the food, what they left in Egypt. They left slavery, a horrible slavery.
And who
And
cried out to God in Egypt? Who
yes,
was it
them.
that begged
Yes.
him to deliver them?
Yes.
And then the amazing way that he delivered them, those plagues and the
Right.
ending, culminating in the death of the firstborn, God showed his power in bringing his people out. As a matter of
And then the
fact,
Red
when they
Sea.
crossed the Red Sea,
Yeah.
it made all the world afraid.
Right.
Rahab
Right.
said that. It
Right.
made them tremble. So, and then the way that they dealt with the king of Moab, it just made the world afraid of them. And here they come out and begin to murmur and say, why did you bring us out of Egypt? And we talked last night a little bit about the spiritual significance to us today. And I mentioned last night, as a matter of fact, in our study that one day I was studying with a lady who was thinking about being baptized, and she said, "Well, I just need to know how hard this is going to be. Do I really have to come 3 times a week? It's really hard for my family to come 3 times a week." Well, that's not the whole of Christianity.
Right.
I understand that.
Right.
But as she said, how much is this going to cost me? And how hard is this going to be? She obviously was not considering what God was going to take her out of,
Right.
the slavery of sin.
Right.
And the Bible says he translates us into the kingdom of his dear son. He was about to move her from a situation where she already had, I don't want to be crass here, but she was headed for hell. She was headed for hell. And God was going to cleanse her and remove her from that, giving her peace and security, knowing that if she trusted him and followed him, all would be well for her.
Right.
Not necessarily financially or, it's not going to be a stress-free life, but she was going to have the promise of heaven. And she had 3 small children that she needed to bring to heaven. And she was asking, is this going to be too hard? Am I going to wish I was back here? And I'm just going to tell you that lady, after we discussed the sacrifice that Christianity is, she was baptized into Christ. She left the faith very shortly thereafter, ended up being withdrawn from by the congregation because she never really was willing to make that sacrifice. She was one who, after she made it, said, life was just so much easier before we did this. We got to just find something easier than this. And so she did, in effect, spit in the face of God. And how much like these people sometimes we are. Let's be really careful, all of us. Let's pray that we will never look at God and say, God, this is too hard.
Well, when people say things like that, or I don't have time, or I always think, Jesus came down here and spent 30 years on this earth, and he died a horrible death, and he had time for you. He went through something so hard that you don't even understand.
How many times have I said that to someone who's complaining about Christianity? And how many times do I say it to myself? And Glenn and I talk about it too. When we say, oh man, life is so hard right now, it's challenging. And we look at each other and say, the cross was hard.
Yeah. It is.
The cross was
You have
hard.
to remember that.
All right, so that word why, and I asked the ladies to try to think of situations in which today people say why. And how, I'm talking about situations where we say why, and God would say, I hate that question. I hate that why.
Right.
And I mentioned some in the blog. If God is so loving, then why is the Bible so full of condemnation? God must hate that. The whole theme of the Bible is our redemption.
Right.
And he's asking us to come out of sin. And in effect, he's saying, help yourself to fulfillment and happiness. And we should never say that the Bible is full of condemnation. The Bible is full of redemption. That's what it's full of.
Right.
And it's condemnation for those who choose to not respond
Right.
to the amazing offer that we have. The promised land instead of the Egypt, which is slavery. If homosexuality is a sin, then why did God make homosexuals? Well, that's a misnomer. God did not make homosexuals. God made people with the
Right.
with the free will to choose. Just like these people who had come out of Egypt could choose when it was time to enter the promised land, whether they were going to have faith and defy the forces of the devil or not. Why should I have to go along with decisions that my husband makes when he's so insensitive? I hear that so often. But, or I'm smarter than he is. That's not God's plan. We don't ask God why, we obey. It is up to us to obey because he's brought us out of slavery. So he's the one with the plan. Do we have comments? Any comments about this?
Genevieve just commented about the Israelites being in slavery. They were bonded.
That's what God had brought them forth from. And then you mentioned let me go ahead and finish. Why did the elders make this decision? It's just so inconvenient to, and you fill in the blank, whatever it is. Why did the elders make this decision? They're the leaders. Just like we're going to find out in this book that we're studying that God was not pleased when the people murmured against the leaders. They are the elders of the church. And why do they expect us to come on Wednesday night? Don't they know we have ball games? Why me? Why am I the one that with this disease? My mother died with cancer, and I'll never forget. Her response was, I'm not going to say, why me? I'm going to say, why not me? I'm no better than anybody else, and I'm certainly not better than my Lord who came to this earth to die. Why not me? Okay, so you had some last night. What are some why questions you can think of?
We talked about why doesn't God want us to be happy? Like in a divorce, remarriage situation when it's not
doesn't
acceptable.
God just want me to be happy?
Right.
We had those
Even in the
cucumbers and those
homosexuality,
fish
too.
back in Egypt. Doesn't God want us to have what we want
Right.
to make us happy?
Right. The same thing.
Exactly.
And then in homosexuality, people say that as well.
Yeah.
And then we talked about some why questions just that people outside of the church ask a lot. And, why are there no instruments? Why is baptism essential? Why do you not have women leaders? Why is there only one church? Why is there suffering? Why, there's several questions that people ask.
And I know that I'm oversimplifying, but we're not God.
Right.
We're not God. God is God.
Right.
And when we choose to come out of slavery, the slavery of sin, he is the deliverer. He is the great I am. And what our job is to obey.
Right.
And
That's what it comes down to, too, with the elders, is that, they make decisions every day that we don't have the full information. And so, we have to trust those decisions. And, it's stuff like, obviously if it's doctrinal, they are okay with us coming to ask them questions about why they made such and such decision. But for things like, why is the carpet green? It's like, who cares? It's not, those things are not important. And, and even decisions that they make with the, just the timing of the worship service or whatever, they've made that decision, and there's a reason that they've made that decision.
And sometimes I'll speak with someone who is, sometimes elders are not qualified. Sometimes
Right.
elders are not wise men. We know that that is the case. And sometimes, in the Old Testament, we learn from the Old Testament, and there are
Right.
some leaders who were really bad leaders
Right.
in the Old Testament. Does that mean, and think about this. Think about 1 Samuel chapter 1. When you get over there and Eli and his children, Hophni and Phinehas, are the priests, Hophni and Phinehas were wicked.
Right.
And they were taking the stuff that people were bringing to sacrifice and hogging the best parts of it for themselves. They were robbing people. They were extortioners. They were drunkards.
Right.
There was a lot going on. Even sexuality was going on in God's holy place. So all this was happening. And the good people, Hannah and her husband Elkanah and Peninnah, the families were still going to the temple to make the sacrifices. Is that the right thing for them to do when all this was going on?
Right. Yes.
Yes, it was still the right thing to do, because we don't get to control everything about the elders. And in the New Testament, when, Jesus was asked, should we give our money to Caesar? What a corrupt government. What a wicked government. He said, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's.
Right.
The government of Nero, Christians still had to pay taxes.
Right.
We don't get to control all the leaders of the country, and we don't get to control the leaders of how every decision about how the money is spent. And sometimes it's an unwise decision. But do we stop giving because we think that money is not spent in the right way? No, we still are commanded
Right.
to give to the work of the church. And so it's not going to be our burden about the decisions about how the money is made. Sure, we can go to the elders and we can say, could we do this? Could we support this missionary? Could we help this widow? But we still are, who are we giving our money to?
God.
We're giving our money to God. And so we still have that responsibility, just like Hannah and Elkanah did in 1 Samuel chapter 1. I think that's an important point to make, is that because we are talking about leaders here, we're talking
Right.
about our responsibility to be subject to the leaders that God's put in place. And as we speak about that, I think these practical matters in our congregations and our responsibility to the work, to give to God, is the same, no matter if our leaders are wise or unwise in the judicious or lack of good judgment in the spending of that money.
Right.
Do we have a comment?
Shamika basically just asked the same question that you just covered about if the leaders are not qualified, do we still respect them? And then Elizabeth Cook said, selfishness often takes our hearts away from God's plans. And that's very true.
I want to say this too. If the leaders are not qualified, we're not going to respect sin.
Right.
We're not going to respect any sin in anyone's life. But our responsibility is to get in the very best spiritual situation that we can for our families.
Right.
That's why you're in this congregation, is because you live in Huntsville, and it's not that there aren't any more sound congregations. There are lots of them.
Right.
But you wanted to choose where you could, maybe some of it is because of distance, maybe some of it is because of decisions that the elders are making, maybe some of it is because of the educational program, but you looked at the picture and you said, I'm going to be where my family can best serve God.
Right.
Now, there are a lot of people in a lot of places in the world, women who are listening right now, who don't have the choices that we
Right.
have.
Right.
But your responsibility is to get your family in the very best situation that you can, under the very best eldership, now I know that some of you could travel 300 miles and find a better eldership. That's not going to work out for your family. You're not going to be able to be faithful.
Right.
You're not going to be able to be involved. So you get the best scenario that you can get, and then you get in there and do the work with that church. And
Right.
you train your son. You encourage your husband to one day take that baton and run with it
Right.
and help that congregation to be better. And you train to make that congregation better. But does that give you an out as far as your sacrifice or your giving or your respect? No, it doesn't give
No.
you an out. You
No, it
gotta go ahead and go with it. So is that, do we have more comments
We
on
do
that?
not.
We don't? Okay. So the why question was not a happy question for God. And I wanted to say this too. One of the girls mentioned last night, I think it was Lindsay, that sometimes when we're saying why, God knows what's right around the corner.
Right.
And we don't know what's right around the
Right.
corner.
Right.
Sometimes the why has to do with, here they were saying, but we miss all that food. We miss the cucumbers. We miss the fish. We got to eat good when we were down there. God was just about to send spies out there into a land that flowed with milk and honey. Only 2 chapters later, that was going to happen.
Right.
And they were going to come back bearing grapes on a pole. I mean, one, what do you call that, cluster?
Cluster,
One cluster of grapes on a pole. I haven't ever seen grapes that I had to carry on a pole. 2 men carrying
Right.
a cluster of grapes. God was about to show them something really yum. And yet, they didn't know that. And so they're complaining about the food they had left behind. Sometimes when we say why, we really forget what God has in store. And for us, it's heaven. And our lives here are just like that. And so let's remember, and we don't even know what he's got in store here
Right.
on this earth.
Right.
So when you ask why, I think, God knows what's 2 chapters later in my life, but I might not know that.
Right.
So that's something that we should remember. Any more comments?
That's it.
All right. Go ahead and tell us what the next question is.
All right. See, it's for chapter 12. Chapter 12 shows the spirit of criticism coming into the leadership and dividing God's people. Choose 2 verses from this chapter that you believe best show God's displeasure with jealousy and division among the leaders of his people. What was the spirit of Moses among whom the attack was leveled? Pray for your congregational leaders today that they may have this spirit.
Okay, so I got 8 and 9 and 14.
Yes.
That show God's displeasure. Go ahead and read 8 and 9 and 14.
Okay. With him I speak mouth to mouth clearly and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And 14. But the Lord said to Moses, if her father had but spit in her face, should she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut outside the camp 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again.
Okay, so here, God is really not pleased. And we know that because of what he said in 8 and 9, and
Right.
because Miriam was smitten with leprosy here, and that God was going to make them wait for the 7 days. He wasn't going to clear this up and let them go on about their business. I think there's a question later about innocent people suffering about the 40 years, but here's another case. The whole camp had to stop
And they had to wait.
because of what Miriam did, Miriam and Aaron. So sometimes when the leadership is challenged, when division happens in the church, the whole church has to stop. The business of evangelism, sometimes it's because the community sees what happens, and the business of evangelism just has to basically stop.
Right.
And it's very important for us to remember that when God hates division, he hates strife. And when we let strife rear its ugly head, we stop. We have to camp for 7 days. And sometimes it's in congregations, it's 7 years or 17 years before the congregation can recover from a division that's occurred. And so God really showed his displeasure here with Miriam, and she was a prophetess. Remember, she had celebrated with, the delivery and Pharaoh's. She had that song about Pharaoh's horse in the sea and all that at the Red Sea. She was a leader especially among the women, I would say, and she was a prophetess. But she didn't see her place here, and she rose up against the face-to-face man, Moses. And God was not pleased with that. And then it says, what was the spirit of Moses? I think we can see it first in verse 3, because God just says, the man Moses was very meek above all the men which were on the face of the earth. That means meek is, my definition is having a cause bigger than yourself. You put yourself in the background, and the cause is what's the most important to you. So he was the meekest man in all the earth. And then when you look down in verse 13, what did God ask Moses? What did Moses ask God to do for?
Moses cried out and he said, "Oh God, please heal her, please."
She was the one who was giving him grief. And he said, please heal her. It was never about him.
Right.
It was never about God, show her what is what here. You know, sometimes I just think if I'd been Moses, I would have just said, okay, I'm just going to show them where to head, and I'm just going to show them right now.
Yeah.
But you know, Moses, it was never about him. It was never about his position. It was never about him. What's that other example that we so often refer to about Moses? Remember when they built the golden calf? And God said, I'm tired of this people.
Right.
I am going to destroy these people. And what was
And
God's idea?
Well, he was going to destroy them.
And make a nation out of Moses.
Right.
He was going to make I think that if that had been me, I would have said,
Okay.
you're going to make a nation out of
me?
moi? The Collyites, the Mosesites?
Right.
But not Moses.
No.
What did he say? This is back in Exodus chapter 32, verses 10 and following.
He basically said, put it on me.
He said, Lord, but, the nations are going to mock you. All the nations around are going to say, can't God do what he wanted to do? And he said, oh, no, Lord, blot me out of your book. And God said, well, I'm going to keep the books. I'm going to blot who sins out of my book. But Moses, I just love that attitude of this is not about, let's put it on our elders.
Right.
This is not about how we look in front of the congregation. This is not about whether we win arguments.
Right.
This is not about that we look leaderly. This is not about that, oh, I must have the respect of everyone. I'm an elder. The leaders are not thinking that.
Right.
They're thinking, how can we as an eldership get everybody that meets in this room
To heaven.
to heaven? That's what they're about.
And that's how Moses felt, too.
So what do you think are some things that elders can do like Moses did to show that?
Well, we talked about last night how Megan said, it's interesting how God has picked people who love people. And that's one thing that the elders, that's one of the things that they have
You
to be.
can't have
Yeah,
all those
they can't.
qualifications
Right,
in
and not love people.
1 Timothy 3 and
Right.
Titus 1. You can't.
They have to love the souls of the whole congregation.
And something our elders have started doing lately is one comes down each aisle during the invitation song, and they're looking in the eyes of people as we're singing that song, and I love that.
Yeah, my mom was here just recently, and she said, I assume those are the elders that come down to the front. And I said, yeah. I said, they just started doing that. And I said, I kind of like it because it's a welcoming feeling, and it's also that they really care.
And when
it really shows that they
someone
care.
came forward last Sunday night, a teenage boy, did you see that elder put his arms around that boy? And, that is not an act.
No,
they're not
it's
play
not.
acting.
No.
Because they're spending all of these hours trying to get people who are wandering away back.
Right,
And,
right.
and they're genuine. And because they meet the qualifications. And so Moses, they're like Moses. I really think they're like Moses. And I know that they're not perfect men, and Moses wasn't either. And sometimes they must get frustrated like Moses did when he hit the rock.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But they're men who, Arnold Wright is our one of our deceased elders. But I remember his wife telling me that there were many nights when he just went in the room and closed the door and just prayed through the night. He couldn't sleep a lot of times on Tuesday nights through a tumultuous time back a couple of decades ago. You know, that's men who, that attitude is, it's not about them.
No.
It is meek. And it is like, in many ways, it is like Moses.
Right.
And aren't we thankful
Yes.
that we have those kinds of elders? So, how heated, number 5, did the persecution of Caleb and Joshua get?
They wanted to stone them.
They wanted to stone Caleb and Joshua. So tell us why they wanted to stone them. What happened in this chapter?
Hold on, give me a second. You moved too fast.
It's the spies.
It is the spies. And they came back, and the people they didn't want to go and do what Caleb and Joshua said. And the other spies were
10 of them.
There was 10 of them, and the rest of them didn't. They were scared. And Caleb and Joshua knew that the Lord was with them, and they pushed. They said, "No, we have to do this."
And because God said, "I've already given it to you."
Right.
And all these, and the other 10 spies were, we're like the famous line, we're like grasshoppers.
Right.
And there's giants in there.
Right.
And really,
They were
God,
scared. I mean, they were scared. That's what it came down
let
to.
me just look at this chapter. When I look at chapter 14, and these spies were called out, and they were named in chapter 14, and it says, let's see, I wanted to point out that, well, actually, it's in chapter 13.
Yeah, they were named.
That the spies were named and sent out. And really, in verse 2, send men, the Lord said, so that they can search the land of Canaan, which I'm giving to the children of Israel. And Moses, by the commandment of the Lord, sent them. And it really didn't say so that they can find out whether you can take the land.
Right.
That wasn't the purpose of going in there. They were searching out the land to see what was
was there.
available there. And that's why they had these grapes. And they came back and they said, oh yeah, it's great land.
Yeah.
It's got grapes like you won't believe, and it's a land that flows with milk and honey, and everything that God said about it is true. But we can't do this. We're just little bitty, and there's giants there, and we're scared, and and God, it wasn't God saying, go in there and find out if you can do it.
Right. He said, "I'm going to give it to you."
He says it's yours. And when God says, I'm going to give you something, it's already given.
Right.
It's as good as done. So the people got so angry that they wanted to stone Caleb and Joshua. And according to chapter 14, who were they really speaking against? Caleb and Joshua or God?
God.
So verse 11, what does it say?
How long will this, I have it written down let me read it though.
Okay.
And the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me, and how long will they not believe in me in spite of all the signs that I have done among them?
Yeah. God didn't say, how come they don't believe Caleb and Joshua? He said, why don't they believe me?
Right.
I have given you this land. So when they rejected Caleb and Joshua, and Moses, they rejected God himself. And Jesus said something kind of like that. He who rejects me and receives not my words has one that judges him. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. And that's found in John 12, 48 and 49. And 49 is really the one I wanted to get to. It says there, John 12, 48 and 49, for I have not spoken of myself, Jesus said, but the Father which sent me, he gave me a commandment what I should say and what I should speak, and his commandment is life everlasting. Whatsoever I speak, therefore, even as the Father said to me, so I speak. Caleb and Joshua could have said that. God's already given us this land. We're just saying what he said. And so they're mirroring Jesus here. They were, Jesus said, if you reject me, you really aren't rejecting me, you're rejecting. How can we bring that to a practical place in our evangelism? When we teach someone the gospel and they decide not to obey, sometimes it's easy for us to feel
like they're rejecting you.
that they've rejected us.
Right.
especially if they're people with whom we have relationships.
Right.
But what we have to realize is that they are not rejecting us. They are
rejecting
rejecting the
God.
gospel. They're rejecting the blood that's been given for them. They're rejecting the one who's bringing them out of the slavery of
Right.
sin, just as these people
Right.
were doing. All right, do we have comments?
Yeah, we have a couple. Back when we were talking about leaders, Nidra Rodriguez says, I think of David and how he was very careful to not speak against Saul in 1 Samuel 26:9.
Correct.
And
Good.
Shamika says, if we aren't careful, we too, like the spies, can miss the point when we are not careful to listen to and obey God's instructions. They should have encouraged the people, not created fear. And Genevieve says, verses 9, Caleb and Joshua said, rebel not ye against the Lord. And there are several more verses that we talked about last night about how
That it was
God
the Lord.
God says that they're not rejecting you, they're
Yes.
rejecting me.
Okay, I want to move on though, because there are a couple of things that I really, really wanted to get to here. What price did innocent Caleb and Joshua and Moses have to pay for the faithless spirits of those within the camp? Are there situations in which God's faithful people today pay for the sins of the congregation? So I looked, and I'm just going to really quickly go over these for the sake of time, but I kind of chronicled those 40 years of wandering. So God said, everybody who's 20 years old and up is going to die in the wilderness. Going to wander for 40 years, and everybody 20 and up is going to die. So that 20-year-olds knew that they weren't going to make it past 60 at that point.
Right.
And you know, it's interesting. What if you were 19 and a few months, 19 and some change, and your best friend was 20? That day you knew that you not necessarily would live through the wilderness, but you had a good chance of living through the wilderness, but your friend wasn't going to live through the wilderness.
Right.
It's really very interesting to think about. And here are some of the things that happened in the wilderness. In Numbers 14, now think about this. Joshua and Caleb and Moses are stuck in this wilderness for 40 years with these people that they really wanted to go on into the promised land. But these people had this faithless spirit. So Numbers 14, they said the people realized that they had done wrong when they were being punished by God. And they said, oh yeah, that was sinful. So we're going to go ahead and do it. We're going to go ahead and go up. And God said, no, no, don't go up. They went anyway. They presumed to just disobey and go up, and they said, oh yeah, that was sinful, so let's just disobey again. And you know, Caleb and Joshua were saying, you know, how long are you going to tempt God? And I wanted to take time for this, but I know that I don't really have time. But this is when Psalm 90 was written, and it was written by Moses. And just take the time, I should have put this in the study, just take the time tonight to go and read Psalm 90 and realize that, you know, it is very, very, very probable and almost certain that this is when Moses wrote Psalm chapter 90, a psalm of, he just asked God to... Let me turn there really quickly and just read a couple of lines from it. And you go and read that tonight. This is when he wrote it. Lord, you've been our dwelling place in all the generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you're God. You turn man to destruction, and you say, return, ye children of men, for 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it's past, and as a watch in the night. You carry them away as with a flood. They're like your sheep. In the morning, they're like grass which grows up. This psalm here is showing utter dependence on God. Okay, we're going to have to wander in the wilderness, but we know that a day is like 1,000 years with you. We are just your sheep. So it's interesting that this is the time that Moses wrote Psalm 90. And then we go on to chapter 15. And there's a man there. I really wanted to read some of chapter 15 because God, through Moses, is telling the people, don't presume to sin. Don't do something that you know is the wrong thing to do. And then this man is killed for picking up sticks on the Sabbath day. Joshua and Caleb are watching this happen. Number 16 is Korah's rebellion. And, Moses' leadership was called into question again. Korah, Dathan, and Abiram went to Moses and said, "Who do you think you are, that you're the leader of these people?" Did they not remember what happened to Miriam? I mean, it's the same thing again. And they go up, and I know that Caleb and Joshua were there saying, do these people ever learn that Moses is the chosen leader of God's people, that God has tapped him to be the one with whom he speaks face to face? So the ground opened up and swallowed Korah and Dathan and Abiram. And then in number 17, the rod budded. Aaron's rod was budding to say, these are the chosen leaders whose rod is budding is the one through whom I'm going to speak, and he's going to be the high priest. And so, Moses must have been frustrated here. And then Numbers 20, let's go ahead and read that. That's important. Verses 2 through 5 of Numbers chapter 20. This is where Moses got angry. He got so frustrated, and he went off and did something that God didn't authorize him to do.
Now there was no water for the congregation, and they assembled themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would that we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle? And why have you made us come up out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It is no place for grain or figs or vines or pomegranates, and there is no water to drink." You want me to keep going?
And what is that word? Why?
Why?
Why? Why are you doing this, Lord? And you know that Moses was frustrated. You know that he was angry when that occurred. And then in Numbers chapter 21, go ahead and read 4 through 6 of chapter 21. Same thing again.
From Mount Hor they set out by the way to the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the people became impatient on the way, and the people spoke against God and against Moses. "Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, and we loathe this worthless food."
Okay, so there we have it again. And then in Numbers chapter 22, remember Balaam was a prophet. He wasn't a prophet of the people of Israel. He was a Syrian prophet. But he wanted to curse God's people. And so, they had to endure Balak, the enemy in the wilderness, that they wouldn't have even been up against if they had gone on into the promised land in the first place. I wanted to mention really quickly, though, I was looking at Balaam and Balak today, and I know that if you've read that, you're familiar with the story, so I won't go into what happened there. But there was this discovery in Deir Allah, Jordan, in 1967, and it was an ancient text on this column of an archaeological dig that they found there, and it talked about this prophet named Balaam. And the question was, could this be the Balaam of the Old Testament? The text makes it clear that it is. 3 times in the first 4 lines, he is referred to as Balaam, the son of Beor, exactly as it is in the Bible. So that was the first Old Testament prophet to be dug up in the Bible lands, not his tomb or his skeleton, but a text about him. The first prophecy of any scope from the ancient West Semitic world to be found outside the Old Testament, and the first extra-biblical example of a prophet proclaiming doom to his own people. Remember, he had to prophesy against his own people. So it's very interesting that a text has been found archaeologically that says Balaam, the son of Beor, 3 times in the first 4 lines of that archaeological text. I just thought that was interesting. And then in Numbers 25, they made a compromise with Moab about marriage and idolatry in verses 1 to 3 of Numbers 25. All of this stuff happened during those 40 years of wandering. Now, how do you feel like Joshua and Caleb? Do you think they about had it up to their gills with these people?
I would say so.
I would say so too. So they had to pay a big high price. 40 years of their lives persevering with people that had a bad attitude when they didn't want to, they wanted to go on over there in the first place. They knew that God had given them the land. So how is it today that innocent people suffer when the people of God are faithless?
We talked some last night about this, just instances when this occurs, but one that I thought of was just in a congregational split. How, the people that are in the right have to deal with that for years, the repercussions of that for years.
Sometimes I think we mentioned also that when parents don't do what God wants
Right.
them to do in the home,
Right.
innocent
Right.
children
Children,
suffer. Innocent people suffer when the people of God are faithless. You have this influence, and innocent people, bystanders can be encouraged by you, but if God's people sin, then generally innocent people will suffer as a
Right.
result of that sin. I know a church in Georgia whose preacher went into sin. It's been several years now, but they have not recovered from that. I know, how about marriage scenarios? What if you know what God's word teaches about marriage and divorce and remarriage, and what Matthew 19:9 says, whoso marries her who's put away for any other reason except fornication commits adultery. You know that, but you go ahead and commit that sin, you've brought someone else into an adulterous relationship, someone innocent who may not have even known God's truth. Innocent people suffer when sin is committed. So do we have comments about that? 'Cause I know
Yeah,
our
Shamika
time's
here a
almost
minute ago said, I guess we can be like that, thinking that this place should be our place of vines and grapes and good things when we are now in life in our wilderness. Heaven is our Canaan. That's a good point.
That's a very good point. Okay, we're out of time, but I just want to say a couple more things. In chapter 1, you were to highlight every reference to courage. And this is in Joshua chapter 1. And that was such a good experience for me. But I wanted to say that I believe Joshua was better prepared to go do the conquering in the land of Canaan because of the persecution, the initial persecution when they wanted to stone him, and when I believe that prepared him better to be a leader. But not only that, but through those 40 years in the wilderness, I think that he must have grown exponentially in his ability to lead those people because he was such a great leader. I think that he learned, for instance, that over and over he learned that disobedience never succeeds with God. It never makes you prosper. He learned, watching Moses. Think about how they were treating Moses.
Right.
And when they got over into the promised land and they were faithless people, he said, I remember they did this to Moses. I mean, he had to think back about how they treated Moses. Think about the leadership that it took when they got over into the land of Canaan in chapter 5. They hadn't circumcised any of those babies that were born during the wandering.
Right.
And they had to
They had to do it
stop
again.
and do surgery on all of the men. And think about what kind of leadership that took.
Right.
To get that done. He was an amazing. Think about Achan and the leadership that it took when, they had just conquered Jericho, and then they go to get this little Ai and they can't conquer it, and he got discouraged then. He said, God, why are we here then? Why, if we're not going to win, why are we here? He questioned that. But he had to think back, I know that he thought, okay, God says something's wrong. And whenever there's sin, we don't prosper.
Right.
He learned a lot in the wilderness. He had to learn a lot traveling with Moses. And he had all that time to learn from Caleb, too. Caleb was a man with another spirit,
Yeah.
as we've read. And Caleb was a man who at 85 said, give me the mountain. And yet Caleb was right there with Joshua when they
Right.
said, let's take the land. And yet Caleb respected Joshua enough that he went to ask him, can I have this land? Can I go ahead and take the land that God promised me? What a meek man. Caleb was just as good as Joshua was on that day, but he still respected Joshua as the leader and said, can I ask you if I can have that land that God promised me? I love that. And then you had the comparisons between Joshua chapter 1 and the very last chapter of Joshua. And those were incredible. Joshua saying the same things that God said to him, he was
Almost
saying to the
verbatim.
people.
Yeah.
Every place where you've put your foot,
Right.
be strong and of good courage. He said the same things almost verbatim to the people that God had said to him in the beginning, which reminded me, go and read 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 to 7. You can comfort other people with the comfort wherewith God has comforted you. You take that same encouragement, you take that comfort, and you give it to other people. And that's exactly what Joshua did.
Right.
And I love that about him. Now, a couple of questions that came to my mind as I was reading today. In Joshua, the very last chapter of Joshua, Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died. But you don't get to do the office of a priest until you're 30 years old. And he was a priest before these 40 years started. So why was he still living? And I had to look it up. I should have known this, but I had to look it up. The Levites, go back to Numbers chapter 14.
Okay.
And this is when the spies were chosen. And God said, I'm going to choose, when he was pronouncing the punishment, in Numbers 14, just start in 28 there.
Okay. 28. Say to them, as I live, declares the Lord, that you have said in my hearing, I will do to you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and of all your number, listed in the census from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me.
Okay, stop. All the people from 20 years old and upward who were
Have
in
grumbled.
the census. And the King James Version says those who were numbered. The men of war were numbered. And that's not the tribe of Levi. Levi was not in the census. They were not numbered because they were not the fighting men. They were the sacrificing men. They were the priesthood. And so they weren't numbered. And so the people, and that was Moses and Aaron and Eleazar and the children of Aaron, those people, Phinehas, those people were not numbered because they were not Levites, and therefore the death in the wilderness did not apply to them. So that's how come Eleazar is just now dying after the wilderness wanderings are over. So I thought that was an interesting thing that I learned from this study. And also, there was no representative of Levi in the spies.
Right.
Because they were not the men of war. So there was no spy from the tribe of Levi. So there was no unfaithful spy that was of the tribe of Levi either. So let's wrap it up. Read for me Joshua 24, verse 31. Joshua 24, verse 31.
Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel.
So from this, as we finish up, we learn that our influence can go beyond death. His influence went on beyond death. We also know that our influence, no matter how good it is as human beings, our influence will not rule indefinitely. We cannot make people do the right thing after our deaths.
Right.
We can influence past our deaths, but our good influence will not go on indefinitely. We have to, why did it say that they followed him? Read that verse again. It said something about knowing the works of the Lord.
In Numbers 14?
Yeah, 24. Numbers 24 and 31.
I'm sorry. Hold on.
Numbers 24:31.
No, you're not. Yeah,
Joshua 24:31. Come on, Joshua 24:31. That's the one you just read, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah.
Sorry, I'm making you go the wrong place. Okay.
Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua and had known all the work that the Lord did for Israel.
Yeah, all the days of the elders who outlived him, who had known the works of the Lord. How do we know the works of the Lord today?
Through the word.
We got to get in the book. And as long as there are people who are in the book, that's how long we're going to serve the Lord. As long as our congregations are in the book, then our congregations are going to serve the Lord.
Right.
So, point 1, our influence can go beyond our death. Point 2, our influence cannot go indefinitely beyond our death. Point 3, we have to currently know the book, the works of the Lord. Point 4, we are one generation always then from apostasy if we get out of the book. And point 5, in the Word, when we are in the Word, we are far from apostasy. So our pulpits need to be full of the Word. Our elders need to be insisting that our pulpits are full of the Word. And what can we as women do for our congregations to encourage people to be in the Word?
We can be in the Word.
We got to be in the Word. We got to pray for our leaders that they're in the Word. We got to go talk to our leaders when they get out of the Word and say, we want the Word. And we got to encourage our husbands to be leaders who are about the Word and raise up our boys to be in the Word of God. And we will not apostatize. We will not if we stay close to this book. Comments. Do we have comments on the wall?
That's it.
No more comments? All right. Well, we're going to close with prayer then. And thank you again
Right,
for
no
being
problem.
with us. We'll see you on January 5th at 7 o'clock. Father, we are so very, very thankful for Joshua, that he is in that great cloud of witnesses that encourages us, that motivates us to be finishers, to look to Jesus, who is the author and finisher of our faith, and to run the race, to make it to the promised land. Help us to have faith and trust, and help us, Father, to revere the leaders that you've chosen for us. Help us, Father, to be like Moses in our spirits and realize that it's not about me, that it is about the cause of your Son, Jesus Christ, on this earth, and bringing as much glory as it is possible in our human frailty to bring to you and to your Son. Help us, Father, to be aware of our influence, to be protective of your body, to be people who promote peace and unity so that the work can go on, and help us not to be like Miriam was in this black chapter of her life when she made the people of God wait. Help us never to do damage to your cause, but always to bring you glory. Father, help us through the coming weeks. We're so busy, but help us, Father, to not neglect the business that is our Father's business. Help us to constantly reflect on the fact that the Bible is the story of redemption, and that redemption and making it to the promised land is the all of our lives here on this earth. True success is living our lives and going to heaven. And true failure is living our lives and not going to heaven. Help us to keep that focus and to keep that clarity in our minds. And it's in the name of Jesus, who made heaven possible for us, that we pray. Amen.